Okay, I think we'll get started. So today's lab is a cool one because we'll be simulating a neuron, and we're actually going to use these builds as something we can use in our neuroscience program here at Concordia College to demonstrate the flow of information from one neuron to the next via an action potential signal. We'll get a chance to learn about input and output. So we've done a lot of this before, but this is an example to see it in an applied case. We're going to utilize a jumper selection, so we'll be able to have a user select mode by switching jumpers from high to low to put the system into one of two modes. And of course this is, as I mentioned, an application, and we'll be able to use this in real life in our neuroscience program to help teach students about flow of information. So you may or may not know much about neurons, but neurons are the excitable cells in our body that carry information via electrical and chemical signaling. The structure of a neuron is unique amongst cells. It has what's called a dendritic arbor, or these are individual dendrites. These are primarily the positions of the neuron cell that receive information. They're connected to the cell body, or soma, so the information coming throughout that dendritic arbor gets funneled to the soma, which acts as an integrator for these electrical signals coming in. If that integration of these electrical signals reaches a threshold voltage at this point here, called the axon hillox, an action potential will be initiated along the axon of this neuron. And most neurons have a single axon. There are some exceptions, but most neurons have a single axon. And then through the opening and closing of potassium and sodium channels, we generate an electrical impulse that travels one direction down the axon to the terminal button, and here it causes an influx of calcium, because there's some voltage sensing calcium channels there that calcium flows into the cell, and this initiates through a signaling process the release of neurotransmitter into the synapse. The synapse is very short distance to the next dendrite of the downstream neuron, and so the diffusion of the neurotransmitter, so this chemical signal, is very fast across the synapse, and then there's receptors on the dendrite that when the neurotransmitter binds, it initiates then an electrical response, and the process starts all over again here in the downstream neuron. And so the flow of information is this direction from one neuron to the next. The action potential itself, again, is an electrical impulse, so a voltage with time, and it has a structure that looks similar to this. The cell is capable of firing only one action potential during the period at which this action potential is going, and this is called the refractory period. There's what's called the absolute refractory period here, and then a relative refractory period here. In the absolute refractory period, you can't re-stimulate the cell. In the relative refractory period, it's much more difficult to re-stimulate the cell. And so for all intents and purposes, you get an individual, unique action potential. You can't stack action potentials, on top of each other. So really, this is a digital signal. It's either on or off. Now we're going to model this, just a single action potential, and that will be determined by a jumper selection by the user, so you could go into single AP mode. But we also want to teach a little bit more in neuroscience, so not so much important for us here in the PIC study, but cells often introduce a burst of action potential, so we want to talk a little bit about bursting in the neuroscience courses. And so the user can select via changing the jumper position a burst mode. And we're just going to just arbitrarily burst 12 action potentials. So essentially what you're seeing here is a zoom out. So the time scale here is longer, we're zoomed out in time. So this is one action potential. So this, imagine this being right here, and then this cell sends a burst. And these bursts can be 2, 3 action potentials, or they can be many action potentials. And again, we're going to use 12. Okay, so we're going to look for an analogy between the neuron flow of information, the neuron, the different parts of the neuron, and then our PIC10F200. So each PIC10F200 is going to act as a neuron, and we're going to utilize our inputs and outputs much like the cell utilizes its inputs and outputs. So input GP3, that isn't so much anything to do with the neuroscience here. That's just the user select mode. So we'll either be in burst mode or we'll be in action potential mode. If we pull it to ground, we just chose that to be the one action potential mode. If we pull it high, that's the burst mode. But that's an arbitrary choice. The meat of this analogy starts then with GP2, which is acting as the, I should have put here, dendrite. Acting to receive a stimulus. So when it's low, then there's no signal. When it's high, then there's a signal coming into the neuron. This will cause the soma to fire, so we're going to represent that as a LED, and that will be on continuously during the whole refractory period. So this is representing the one time that the neuron has integrated the signal and developed the action potential or developed the threshold voltage at the axon helix that will result in the action potential. The GP0 will represent the axon, and we've got another LED here that will fire either one action potential or a burst of action potentials. Then we can represent the synapse as with a wire. Now, of course, this is still electrical. It's not chemical. It'd be cool to do some electrochemistry and actually have this a chemical process. But for now, we'll just use a wire. And we'll send this into GP2 of the next PIC. And then that will start that process all over again. And we'll just show a string of 3, I guess, action potentials. But you can imagine that we could make a whole bunch of these, maybe even 3D print some containers for them and put them together like Legos to represent a neural network. All right, so let's go look at the circuit and also the assembly code that is used to simulate these neurons. All right, so here we have a single PIC 10F200, and again, these are set so that we can program with our PIC kit 5. So all these wires here are just to be able to program with our kit, PIC kit, and then we have the output here, GP0, and GP1 over here. We don't even have an input wire hooked up here. We will later once we get it running. So let's go ahead and look at the code. So this is a simulated neuron program, and what we're going to do is take an input, and then it will produce 2 outputs, one representing the refractory period. So one LED will just be on the whole time that it can't receive another signal. And so in the code, what that is, we're polling we're going to poll on GP2, and once it receives a signal, then it gets out of that loop. And of course, it doesn't matter if it gets another signal. So there really is a refractory period, in a sense, here on the PIC itself. So that's representing the physiological case of refractory period. Now, once that happens, we're going to put a little delay in there to sort of be physiologically realistic. So our soma will come on. Then very shortly after that, we will have our LED light for our axon come on. In the one action potential mode, this will be on for a while, so we're a little bit more zoomed in time. And then that will go off, and then our soma will go off very shortly after that, meaning we're ended the refractory period, and then we can receive another signal. So it'll go back up to the polling loop and be able to get another signal. If we are in the burst mode, then we will see the LED flash. So that's really all the difference is. And we'll see there's a pretty slick one-line way to code the transition from a user-selected single axon action potential to a user-selected burst of action potentials. Okay. And we've just arbitrarily chosen 12. We'll see in the code where we can change the delays. So if you really wanted to emphasize the turning on of the excitation of the soma, put a longer delay until the action potential is fired, and then maybe a longer delay to represent the recovery period. But that's all in the code. Right now it isn't a user-selected mode. Okay, so let's jump into the code here. So this is, again, always the same. Watchdog timer and master clear and so on. The include files, everything we need, and then the direction of the program counter to start at main. Main, again, we have this part that we only change once, and that is to set the inputs. So in this case, we're using all of our pins 0 through 3. 0 is an output, so it's 0. 1 is an output, so it's 0. 2 and 3 are inputs, so they're set as 1. We can write tris6 writes that to the register, and then again, just to make sure that the GP2 is taken as an input rather than the external clock, we use this binary literal. Option is what writes it to the option register, and then we should be all set to go. Okay, so let's get into the main loop here. This first literal is just what we had arbitrarily chosen to be the number of action potentials. So I just put a dozen here. That's going to be stored in a memory register 13. We're going to clear the outputs, so they're sitting low. We're not going to have any LEDs on right at the beginning. So they're waiting. Here it is, waiting for a signal. And GP2 now is doing the polling. So GP2 is polling. We're skipping this step if set. So if there's no stimulation on GP2, so no input on GP2, then we will click back up into main and we'll just be whipping through this loop. As soon as we get a signal, then we'll jump out of the loop. We will then institute a delay, and so we'll move 53, which is about half a second delay. Again, this is an empirical delay, not calculated. So roughly half a second. Again, we don't care how precise that is. During that, then immediately we will set the GP1 to high. So this will represent the soma has now integrated a signal up, and this starts the beginning of the full refractory period. And so we'll call that delay of about a half a second. Then we will go into this burst. So this is setting up to do the burst if that's user selected. If not, then we'll just get a single light will just stay on for this whole period. And that's easy to handle here. So how are we going to do? Let's first talk about burst mode. So in burst mode, GP3 is going to be set high. So we're going to first set GP0, so that's going to turn the light on. We're going to delay for a small period of time, so this will be just the flash. And so we'll set a number here. This will be about, oh, I think I have this incorrect. This should be it's probably a quarter second. Anyway, this will be a short delay. And then now we'll check GP3, and if it is low, then we skip this. Right? We're going to skip this. So that means we're not going to turn off GP1. So it's going to stay high. So essentially we're just always turning GP0 high in both the on and off parts of this burst. So that's a way to keep it on the whole time without having to make another branch in the function. So we just skip this step. Another delay, but who cares? This is still on. And then we decrease our counter by 1. So this is going to be the 12 inputs, and we just go back to burst, and we'll go through this 12 times. We won't notice anything happening because the light will be on that whole time. And then after 12 times through, then this will leave this burst loop, and we add another bit of a delay to represent a recovery period, the back part of that refractory period. And then we go back up to the main loop, and we start looping through the polling again to see if we get another signal. If the signal's still on, then boom, we fire another action potential. But what's nice is that it's representing, even if you're getting constant signal, a neuron's getting constant signal, it can only fire its action potential so fast because of that refractory period. So let's check the other case, the other user case where we do want to burst. In this case, we come through, we enter our burst, GP0 is set high, so the light turns on, we have the short delay. Now we're checking GP3 and it's set, so we don't skip this step. It goes to here, and so that drops GP0 to low, and so we get this toggling on and off to give this flash burst of representing the action potential, so a flash of the LED. All right, so that's it, a pretty simple program to make this nice little project that can be used then to teach some of the concepts in neuroscience. So let's go ahead and let me just build, make sure everything's okay. And it is. And then I'll write this to the chip. Okay, it's complete. Now notice nothing is happening here. We don't have any input set up, but I can just by getting my fingers close to the input, I can initiate a signal. Or usually can. There we go. And so in some sense, you can already see this as something valuable for a student in neuroscience. For example, this could be like a touch receptor, and you touch the chip and the neuron fires. All right, let's look at this in another application where this is in series. So I'll move this out, and now I've got 3 of these. And let's hope this all works here. And what I've got here, I've got just an open lead right now. So because I'm touching it, there's a lot of noise, and so it's always getting a signal, and we can see the system firing. We've got it in burst mode here. I can move this. Let's see, this is our, I can move this to ground. So the green wires here are the jumper select. So this is on GP. And so now we've gone into the mode where we have a single action potential rather than the burst. Let's put it back at burst. And I've made some printed circuit boards, and these will be just little quick, easy jumpers to do once those are all in and soldered together. All right, let's let me just drop this out and get away from it for a bit. And now I'm not touching it, so we're not getting much of a signal. But if I put my finger close to it, then it initiates a signal. So this would be, again, like a sensing neuron. Here, the top one would be a sensing neuron. And then we have some cascade of events that send that information to several neurons. The yellow, and I ran out of yellow, so the blue LEDs are representing the refractory period of each. And then the small red LEDs are representing the action potentials. The resistors are just to either limit the current for the LEDs or set the GP3 to ground when it's not actually set to high. That's all the circuits I've got set up for this video, but you can certainly imagine using an AND gate and having two neurons come into a junction, so that then the output of that AND gate will fire only if it's receiving signal from two neurons at the same time, which of course is something that happens in our brains. And another thing that I'm going to do here is add an extra component in that AND gate, where rather than another neuron, we have the presence or absence of a ligand. And there's a very important receptor called an NMDA receptor that serves, in a sense, like a logical AND gate for the nervous system. If a magnesium ion is present in a receptor site and a electrical signal comes, then that neuron will fire. But if the magnesium is not present and the action potential comes, then it won't fire. And so instead of two neurons coming in, you could make just a little connector where you drop in a steel ball bearing that completes the circuit, gives a high voltage to an AND gate, and then this to an AND gate. And so there's lots of different things that you can model just with this simple PIC10F200, an analog for the neuron. And so that's it for today. I think that we probably won't do more with this in the PIC series, but if you're interested in this, I'm sure eventually I'll have some videos on this from the neuroscience side of things.